What's going on, guys? Welcome back, and today I am very excited to be bringing you a video that I've been planning for quite a while. Now, today I am going to be bringing you my ranking of all 6 Canon Thrawn books. Now, before I get into it, I do want to clarify that I have not read the Legends Thrawn books, or the ones that are no longer canon. I believe they are known as the Heir to the Empire series. And I have seen that people do hold those books in really high regard, perhaps in higher regard than these books, because I think I like these books a lot more than most, but I would be interested in reading those books at some point. But for now, I'm just going to stick to the canon books. Perhaps once I have read those in the future, I'll kind of redo this ranking, adding in all of the Legends Thrawn books. But for now, I'm just going to stick to the canon ones. I do want to clarify, though, that I love all of these books. I think they're all really good to great. They're all top-tier Star Wars material. Just for comparison's sake, I read 5 other Star Wars books besides these ones, and I only liked 2 out of the 5 that I read. So that should just kind of solidify how good these books are. This was a really difficult ranking, though, because considering how much I like each of these books. But the bottom 2 here are kind of interchangeable to me. I could switch them on any day of the week. But I do believe that based on my personal opinions, this is the most accurate ranking I could give. Now, at number 6 here at the bottom of the list, we have Thrawn Treason, the final installment in the first Canon Thrawn trilogy. And this book is really good. It does feel like a logical conclusion to the series, at least in chronological order. And it brings both the worlds that you've been reading about across all 6 of these books together into cooperation, at first into conflict and then cooperation in order to defeat this greater threat, the Chiss Ascendancy and the Empire. They both kind of come to a head and kind of interact in this one, and that's what you want out of kind of an epic 6-book spanning series like this. And it manages to create another unique and intriguing plot that feels distinct from the other ones. These books could fall into the same trappings of feeling similar, like Thrawn has some kind of mystery he has to solve. He deduces the bad guy's plan and stops the bad guy. You know, it's kind of like they could all kind of fall into similar trappings, but this one was yet again able to feel distinct in regards to the way Thrawn, especially the way Thrawn deduces the villain's plan, actually felt really unique and interesting in this one. And it's just an interesting plot. It's a fun read, and it introduces a lot of fun new characters, such as Assistant Director Ronan, kind of Krennic's underling, Krennic from Rogue One. He's a really fun character, as well as this ISB agent they introduce. It just introduces a lot of fun, unique characters. But it's the one that can feel the most restricted by the place that it's set in the timeline. This book takes place congruently with Star Wars Rebels Season 4, and since we know where Thrawn ends up by the end of that show, it feels like kind of the stakes are a little bit reduced in this book, because they had to kind of condense it, and it feels like Timothy Zahn was very limited in regards to what he could do with the plot in this one. And also, I don't really buy the Grisks as a threat in this book and in Thrawn Alliances, because we're just told about how imposing and threatening and just how powerful they are, and everything we're shown just doesn't reinforce that. They just seem like they kind of suck, and like they get beaten at every turn by Thrawn, like, very easily. So despite the fact that we're told how great the Grisks are and how imposing they are, they don't really live up to that. So, I mean, they're fine as an obstacle for Thrawn and his team to overcome, but I don't really buy them as a threat. And it also feels like some of the elements of the plot that should have been given more credence and resolution were kind of neglected. For example, the return of Eli Vanto, Thrawn's buddy from the first Thrawn book, finally returns in this one, and it feels kind of disappointing the way they executed it. Throughout the entire book, Eli's trying to get an opportunity to just talk to Thrawn because he's confused as to why Thrawn put him in the position he did within the Chiss Ascendancy at the end of the first book. And it feels like on a character level, there was meant to be some kind of resolution between those two characters and their relationship. And it feels like that never really happens in the book. I understand they're leaving it open-ended to be explored in the future, but I personally don't really find it likely that characters like that would appear in a TV show. But I mean, that's besides the point. It just feels like in the context of this book, they set up a lot of things to be paid off that just weren't really. And that's why I feel it's the weakest of all 6 books. Now, at number 5, we have Thrawn Alliances, the second installment in the first Canon Thrawn trilogy, and this one's really fun. You know, the dynamic between both Thrawn and Anakin and Thrawn and Vader is really fun and entertaining, and also very engaging, the dynamic between both of those characters. You really do get a lot of layers added to Vader's character that I wasn't expecting, that you don't really see in a lot of other forms of Star Wars media. It's able to balance both stories set in both the present and the past really well, without making one seem like it's taking precedence over the other, and it's able to tie really well into basically every other form of Star Wars media, Clone Wars, Rebels, even the other books, particularly Chaos Rising, and it adds many layers to the events that happen in those shows, and even the prequels as well. And despite that, it feels like the one where Thrawn is the most irrelevant as a character. Within all of the other books, Thrawn's always dealing with some kind of struggle. In the first book, he's dealing with the discrimination of being an alien within the Empire. In the entire Ascendancy trilogy, he's dealing with kind of the backlash from the political system within the Chiss Ascendancy, and in Thrawn Treason, he's dealing with his mixed loyalties between the Chiss Ascendancy and the Empire. And you may say, oh, you know, Vader is kind of threatening him throughout the book, and that is true. Throughout the entire book, Vader's kind of nagging at him and reminding him of his loyalties to the Empire. He's like, you gotta choose which you're more loyal to, the Chiss Ascendancy or the Empire. And despite that, it feels like at every turn, Thrawn is able to sweet-talk his way out of punishment, and you're expecting some kind of reprimand or something at the end of the book, but that never really comes. Thrawn's just kind of able to dance his way around harsher punishment, and he doesn't really get into any hot water regarding his loyalties between the Empire and the Ascendancy until Treason. So, it's a really fun read with a lot of great character work, but it's kind of the one where Thrawn as a character is the most irrelevant, and that's not great considering that it is a Thrawn book. Now, coming in at number 4, we have Thrawn Ascendancy Chaos Rising. Now, this one has a special place in my heart because it was the first one that I read, and it was what really got me into the Thrawn series as a whole. Now, with that said, it's, in my opinion, the weakest of the Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy. That's not to say that it's bad by any means. This book has some really fantastic world building because of the fact that Timothy Zahn was a lot less restricted with this one, as opposed to Thrawn Alliances and Thrawn Treason. It feels like he just had a lot of fun, you know, writing this book and building out this world. You get introduced to the Chiss Ascendancy and all the political systems within it, as well as all the different families, and it never feels confusing. It's really well paced and really well constructed. The flashback chapters perfectly complement the current story being told. It's constantly engaging. It has some really great character work in it as well. You are introduced to all of these new fun characters that I really grew to love over the course of this trilogy. And you do kind of get a little bit more exploration of Thrawn's character than you usually get in these books, but it's not really until Lesser Evil where you get the payoff for all of that, but the seeds are definitely planted in this first book. With that said, I would say that this one has the weakest plot of all 3 Thrawn Ascendancy novels. It's not really until you get into Greater Good and Lesser Evil where the plot thickens and you really get to the meat of the story. In this one, it's relatively simple. It's kind of the familiar stuff for a Thrawn story. Thrawn's got to take down this bad guy, but he feels much less significant in the long run as opposed to Jixtus in the second 2 books. But all in all, this book is really carried by the excellent character work and world building. At number 3, we have Thrawn Ascendancy Lesser Evil, the most recent book. Now, it's really kind of fresh in my memory right now, and it may change over time, but as of right now, I think this was just a great conclusion to not only the Ascendancy trilogy, but just kind of the overarching Canon Thrawn series. It is just epic. That's the best way I can describe it. It does very much feel like the Return of the King of Thrawn books. It pays off all of the character arcs that were set up really well, and just is kind of the most emotional of, I would say, all of these books. It ends on kind of a somber note, and you get kind of the payoffs to all the seeds that were planted in the prior two books in regards to Thrawn's past and his character, and his connection to the character of Thras. And just once again, it's just a really epic book. It all culminates in this very exciting battle at the end, which is exactly what you want at the end of a series like this. Basically everything I already said in my review the other day. It's just a really well done book, a really great conclusion, and I loved it. I thought Thrawn Ascendancy, Lesser Evil was great. The only thing I would say, once again, that was missing was some kind of large-scale stakes. There are stakes on a character level, particularly pertaining to Thrawn's character, but on a larger scale, it feels like this warranted some kind of significant death. And typically with stories like this, either a main character dies and no one else dies, or like a bunch of faceless extras die in the background and none of the main characters die. But in this one, it doesn't really have either. Like, I was expecting at the end some kind of report or scene where they're talking about all the casualties that they suffered, but they don't really talk about that. It doesn't really feel like the Ascendancy lost a lot of warriors or anything, like perhaps only the protagonist that we know survived and everyone else died. There wasn't really anything like that, and I felt like something like that was necessary to kind of solidify this book's position as a high-stakes finale to the series. But other than that, this was a great conclusion to the series, and I loved it. Then at number 2, we have Thrawn. Just Thrawn. There's no subtext there, just Thrawn from 2017. This is the first Canon Thrawn book, and this one I would say is just not only a great Thrawn book, but also a great Star Wars book. It adds many layers to things that we are familiar with as Star Wars fans. For example, the Empire. You get this real interior perspective through Thrawn of the process of climbing through the ranks of the Empire, and you see all the hardships that he has to endure being an alien within that kind of subgroup, that society, and it just adds many layers to the Rebels versus Empire conflict. It has, in my opinion, one of the most compelling antagonists of the series, because he's not really an antagonist or villain in the common sense of the word. He's this character that Thrawn fully empathizes with and understands, and he just kind of has a different way of going about things, and he believes in different morals than Thrawn. It's actually kind of a moral argument, and that makes it much more interesting than just, oh no, the Grisks, we gotta go blow them up. You know, like, it's kind of much more engaging in that regard. And, you know, it also just tells kind of this real kind of deep story about the corruption within political systems and kind of the allure of power. You have Thrawn, this person who is within kind of this group of power-hungry individuals, and you see how he is able to escape the allure of power, but then on the other side of it, you have the character of Arihinda Price, who kind of takes up 50% of the book, and you see she's kind of the direct juxtaposition to Thrawn's character, because she is just completely corrupted by the allure of power, and you see how she becomes this just monster by the end of it. And it's also kind of just the most grounded, I suppose, of all the Thrawn books. It just tells kind of this story of Thrawn and his buddy Eli kind of solving these mysteries without, like, around the galaxy, kind of almost like Sherlock Holmes, and it just kind of is able to make you become acquainted with the Star Wars galaxy in kind of more of a casual sense than a lot of other books. It's not really on a grand scale like a lot of the other ones. It can feel kind of smaller scale, but in a sense it feels like much more deep than the other ones, because it's able to explore a lot of similar themes to the other books, but kind of in a more powerful sense, because it's on a more ground, personal level. And I think this book's just great. I think it's, once again, kind of the one that I would say is not just a great Thrawn book, but just kind of a great Star Wars book, and just a great book overall. And finally, at number 1, we have Thrawn Ascendancy, Greater Good, the second book in the Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy. Now, this one I just don't understand the hate for. I feel like this one is extremely underrated. It kind of spoke to me in a way that none of the other Thrawn books really did. I don't know why. It was just the most engaged I was in any of these books, and it plays the role really well of being the middle chapter. A lot of people kind of underappreciate the purpose of a middle chapter within a story, because within this one, you're kind of able to take in the story slower. It's kind of a slow-paced book. There's a lot of build-up, and you don't really know what's happening throughout a lot of the book, which kind of makes it interesting and makes you engaged, and you always want to see what's about to happen next. All the elements of it felt like they were done to perfection, really. The flashback chapters were set very close to the events we're seeing take place right now, so there's kind of a buildup of dread. And it's also able to explore themes that other Thrawn books weren't really able to explore, because we're already acquainted with this world of the Chiss Ascendancy thanks to Chaos Rising. So one of the main characters we follow throughout this book is just this rancher, Lackfro. And you see how he is kind of piecing together the mystery as well, and it's kind of like the smaller person that is kind of deemed as insignificant by the rest of the characters that's actually able to piece together the mystery, because without that character, Thrawn would not have been able to stop the threat at the end of this book, and I feel like it's very important. It's kind of, once again, that theme that I really love. It's kind of similar to the Lord of the Rings, right? It's the small things that keep evil at bay, and in this case, it was just this random dude who was able to piece together this threat and was able to stop kind of one of the main antagonists of the story. And I think this book also did a great job of being the middle chapter, also telling its own self-contained story within a larger story. That's what kind of really struck me about this one, because this trilogy is very epic and spanning, and it was able to really kind of narrow in and focus on the smaller things, the nuances of the characters. And, you have a lot of different perspectives as to what's going on. Once again, you have just kind of random people, ground-level people like us, this farmer guy. And, it just makes it more interesting to see all these different perspectives on the events that are happening, and not just through the lens of this singular character. And it's the most complex plot in a lot of regards. I read this one with my dad, as I did with all of these, and he said he didn't really love it because he felt like there was too much going on with the flashbacks and such, and that he felt like he got a little bit confused at points. But to me, that makes it really impressive, the fact that it was able to handle all these elements. It feels like it had the highest stakes of all of them, because since it's kind of on a lower scale, on a more personal scale, the stakes feel higher. It's not like in Lesser Evil where they really do kind of go all out with the grand scale of it, and it feels like on that scale there were some stakes lacking. But in this one, seen as it's kind of a smaller scale story in quite a few regards, as a part of a larger epic story, it feels like it's able to have more stakes contained within it. And I don't know, it was just kind of my favorite story that was told out of all 6 of these books. It had the most payoff, it had the most elements that really engaged me, and I don't know, I don't really have any super valid reasons as to why I love this one, except for the ones that I just stated. It just spoke to me the most out of all these books, and that's why Thrawn Ascendancy Greater Good is my favorite of all 6 canon Thrawn books. Now, with all that said, that's pretty much it for my ranking of all 6 canon Thrawn books. Once again, in the future, once I've read the Legends Thrawn books, perhaps I'll return to this video and create a new ranking, and once I've had more time to think on Lesser Evil, its position may change on the list. But for now, this is, in my personal opinion, how I would rank all 6 of the Thrawn books. Once again, I would recommend this series to any of you who are Star Wars fans and are kind of a little bit bored of the cliches and tropes of the franchise. These books add so much to those other stories while also telling very compelling stories on their own. I can't recommend this series enough. As a person who kind of got sick of Star Wars for quite a few years, and then thanks to the shows got back into it, this really did kind of solidify Star Wars in my mind, and I loved all 6 of these books. It may have sounded like I was trashing a few at the bottom, but really, I think all of them are really good. And with all that said, that's pretty much all I have to say here in this video. You guys please let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. If you have read all of the Thrawn books, what is your ranking, and are you going to read the Thrawn books? Just, once again, whatever your thoughts are, please let me know them all in the comments below. And of course, as always, I hope you guys have a great day. Take care.